This is our project, The Syndestry, and we are Chris.
Callum,
And Joe.
4 key points we want to try and tackle with this project are to mitigate loneliness through spaces that maximise the potential of virtual technologies, provide a building that utilises multiple forms of technologies into the spaces, and produce a building that reflects the fluidity of the virtual landscape that we are dealing with, and to explore sustainable methods of design that could also enhance the experience for inhabitants in the building.
Initially, we broke down the key terms that we saw related to loneliness, and that was isolation, which is the removal of oneself from others, solitude, which in small doses can make oneself more creative and lead to benefits, but in longer doses can lead to loneliness, and loneliness itself, which is a social pain that affects the brain and is split into two key issues: social loneliness, which is the absence of feeling within a group dynamic, and emotional loneliness, the absence of feeling love from close family and friends. And these are the three topics that we will focus heavily on during our project.
Referring back to the studies that we did for the monasteries that we reviewed, we looked at the different sort of spaces that you would normally find in a typical monastery. And the two key spaces that we decided to try and study even further and include into our design is the idea of cells within a monastery that would provide a place of solitude for the inhabitants. Even though the space itself as a monastery is seen as a very peaceful space, we wanted to try and review what sort of intimate spaces there are within those overall calm environments. And another thing that we reviewed was the idea of cloisters in these monasteries as well. So public spaces and social spaces within these peaceful buildings.
This dichotomy between solitude and togetherness helps to mitigate the chances of loneliness occurring. Following this, we looked to find solitude in places outside of religion, and we looked at the work of James Turrell, who uses light to create spaces of solitude. This gave us a connection to light and how light can intrinsically help the body and mind, especially with the effects of loneliness, such as depression, anxiety, and stress. Because of this, we've distributed a questionnaire based around the effect of different coloured lights on the body, and we're currently recouping all the answers, so the lighting in our building will be effective for every person within it.
For the Liverpool Architectural Society competition, we submitted a proposal which created an interface between the virtual and reality, allowing people to remotely access the pavilion through a virtual reality headset and being projected into the space. This would allow people who are at the pavilion in reality to interact with people remotely with more presence than just using a screen.
The research that we gained from this has become a foundation that our thesis has been built upon.
So our site location is just located on the corner of James Street towards the Strand. The site is currently derelict with a lot of space to be used and is in a prime, valuable position in Liverpool. With local connections into the city centre as well as a train station nearby, this is the perfect place to produce a hub for combating loneliness in the modern day.
The site being so close to James Street Station gives access to the whole of Merseyside through Merseyrail, and this means access to approximately 1.5 million people. Within Liverpool itself, it has a higher percentage of 19 to 44-year-olds who are more akin to becoming lonely, and 15.1% more single people than in England and Wales, which is a precursor to becoming lonely. Now we'll dive into our proposal, which is the Syndestry. This 1:200 CNC routed model allowed us to understand our building within the surrounding context. As such, we were able to start with a tower-like structure that would separate the private and public parts of the building. However, this was out of character with the surroundings and slowly became the rectilinear form of the urban grain. This then allowed us to disrupt the internals of the building to create the dichotomy between the rigid outside of the building and the fluid inside of the building, representing the relationship between actual and virtual.
The following images are of different views of the exterior of the building.
This view highlights how the rectilinear form of the building fits within the urban grain of James Street. Yet through the roof lanterns, the fluid interior of the building can be glimpsed.
From the street view, the facade of the building carries the light out of the building through the translucent boxes that don the outside. This light and the shadows it creates gives a notion at the events that happen within this industry.
This elevation on the Strand highlights how the exterior of the building mimics its surrounding in new ways by mediating the height and the rectilinear forms of the contextual buildings. This view also highlights how the building can change in transparency depending on your aspect to it.
This 45-degree section highlights how the leaning column provides the main structure of the building. The glulam column supports the CLT floor plates by balancing the forces through it. With the clockwise spiral in tension and the counterclockwise spiral in compression, this helps distribute the load of the building to the pad foundations. This column also helps to support the spiral ramp, which is fixed with steel connections at the floor plates and across the breadth of the column.
This section highlights the changing height of the floor plates and how this allows us to create more private spaces the further up the building you go. Because of this change in height, the ramp is able to continue to comply with regulations as its circumference decreases. In total, it is 43.24 meters longer than the shortest length it needs to be to comply with the regulations.
The 3D section allows you to understand the depth of the project with the fluid interior walls and the ever-changing floor-to-floor height, which denotes privacy across the building.
Having the central atrium poses a risk of fire spreading. However, we've mitigated them by implementing a system of fire curtains that drop in the event of a fire. It is able to be stack ventilated, which helps with the everyday running of the building, but also in case of fire, where it helps to save the structure of the building.
As previously discussed, our facade uses the philosophy of object-oriented ontology to blend objects together to create new meanings. We have iterated on the original design, which was a static variant, to a fluid facade that allows the control of light into spaces, aspect, and the object seen on the outside of the facade in a similar fashion to Jean Nouvel's Institut Art du Monde. The facade itself is made from a steel rig whose telescopic arms allow recycled polycarbonate boxes to expand and contract as needed. The steel structure of the facade allows the building to protect against any racking, and the polycarbonate boxes are self-extinguishing but can be retracted in the event of a fire to help prevent the spread up the building.
This site plan illustrates the relationship of this industry to the surrounding context, allowing for easy access from James Street, as well as acting as a new thoroughfare from Derby Court.
The basement is a narrative VR space that allows people to cooperate in order to strengthen bonds with one another as they experience a joint adventure. This VR attraction that provides a way for people to familiarize themselves with VR will allow them to use the technology to help them if needed. This basement can also be viewed throughout the atrium through a frosted glass ceiling.
The entrance to the building acts as a thoroughfare for people on their commute, while offering nooks for people to use throughout the day. These can be a meeting space for friends, or just a space for individuals. As the Sheffield Loneliness Lab report states, to prevent loneliness, you have to be comfortable with yourself. The main area provides a direct connection with those in the VR space below, enticing people to try the activity, while the space itself provides a place for local groups to advertise to allow people to join and create more fruitful communities that protect against loneliness.
The intermediate floor and back of house on the ground floor allows for deliveries, amenities to keep the building running, as well as a server room that is above ground in case of the change in water level.
The first floor provides an entrance through Derby Square at the rear of the building, which will replace the existing public highway. The main program of the floor is a loneliness and virtual reality experience, which allows visitors to the building to understand what loneliness is and how it may affect them, and how VR and this industry can help them if they need it. The fluid forms here create mini pavilions which mimic the proposal we created for the new normal competition. These allow for us to change the exhibition over time to accommodate new technologies or change in knowledge. Within all the spaces, The virtual copy of the building is highlighted through the use of lights showing those in the virtual world occupying the same space as everyone else.
Ritual creates an anchor of connection, which reinforces bonds and reduces the risk of loneliness. In this industry, we use food as a ritual, whether that is a guest in our accommodation coming down for breakfast every day or a group of friends meeting every week for a catch-up. This creates familiarity with yourself, space, and others, and tightens the bonds with those around you. The second floor consists of a bar and kitchen that allows for individual and group seating arrangements to fit everyone's preference and comfort.
The third floor caters for group VR therapy and play spaces. These allow for larger groups to have sessions together. Sharing experiences creates bonds between people, which can help to reduce social loneliness. There are group therapy rooms, as well as which allow for people to talk with therapists and family members, whether in person or VR, to mitigate loneliness. Across the building, there are smaller interventions which form furniture across the floors. The curved spaces provide comfort as reports state that people are more calm within fluid geometry. There are intimate spaces that are adjacent to the main areas, providing intimacy away from others or comfort to individuals as they dip their feet into sociability. Lastly, this fluid nature is reflected within the cores and continues throughout the building.
The fourth floor is inspired by the work of Anna Heringer and provides fluid spaces that bring comfort to the individual. This floor is similar to the ones below but focuses on the individual. This diagram highlights how people move within the spaces and their comfort levels with others. The floor itself consists of cognitive behavioral therapy, virtual reality therapy, virtual reality connection rooms, and meditation areas. These allow the individual to work through social anxiety, their relationships with others, with loved ones, and then mitigate any negative effects through solitude.
So the fifth to seventh floors consists of accommodation for guest residents who are seeking to help their plight with loneliness. These spaces are all-encompassing and allow the individual to have their own private room that they can persist from. As such, these spaces incorporate meditation and VR therapy spaces to help the individual on their journey to recover from loneliness. However, in the shared group spaces outside the accommodation, there are gardens, there are indoor gardens which create shared experiences between each guest through looking after plants. The Sheffield Loneliness Lab highlights that looking after plants can create tighter bonds between people, which will mitigate social loneliness.
The roof garden provides a space for people to meet, socialize, and relax in nature, whilst also having views towards the Three Graces and the Albert Docks.
So these slides basically discuss the possibility of expanding our programs out into other areas from the Liverpool city centre region. So an example that we've kind of looked at is looking at introducing this sort of philosophy into a suburban area. So for those people who don't necessarily want to go into a city yet or a bit anxious about going into a city, we have a similar setup outside in these sort of areas. So an example here is in Picton on Earl Road. So we've taken a derelict building, which we would do in other areas, and basically following the same design philosophy that we've implemented in the Liverpool city centre, is develop buildings similar to this industry that would have similar programs and spaces that allow people to use virtual reality and other forms of technology to basically counter their social anxiety or try and reduce it over time. And this is all being done on a more intimate scale.